The planet's dying, folks, so it's time for one of my ever-popular, cynically motivated trailer reaction videos for the Final Fantasy VII Remake, which was shown off at Sony's State of Play event, and they've certainly confirmed that the first 5 minutes of Final Fantasy VII are in the remake. That's where 99% of the footage seems to come from. It's probably the only bit of the game they've made, because Square Enix likes to announce things about 10,000 years before they actually come out. But it certainly looks very modern Square Enix. Big emphasis on graphics and how pretty everyone looks. Very pretty men with big swords. And this is the combat. Clearly they've moved away from the traditional active time battle system that was in Final Fantasy. Attack while its tail is up! They've moved away from the active time battle system because Square Enix seems to have... Well, it seems to always be ashamed of old RPG combat tropes. They're always trying to find a way to modernise it, to actionize it. Despite the popularity of games outside the Final Fantasy series, like Octopath Traveler, having more traditional, closer to turn-based systems. When it comes to Final Fantasy, Square Enix can't stop fucking with the combat system. And what we're now seeing in Final Fantasy VII, the remake, leads me to believe that my fears about that remake will come to pass, where the modern Square Enix, the Square Enix that makes games now, not the Square Enix that made games in the 90s, will not so much do a remake of Final Fantasy VII, but their own modern-day reimagining of it. And I just don't think it's necessary. That's one of my issues. There are some games that don't need remakes. Now, a remaster, something that rebalances what's already there, something that gives the original game a few modern concessions, like maybe speed up the ATB system and speed up some of the attack animations. Something fully integrated into the game rather than those little cheat buttons that are in the re-releases of the Final Fantasy games. Something with an enhancement, that I'm fine with, but a from the ground rebuild? I'm not gonna write it off, but I remain very cynical and a little bit worried about it, because Final Fantasy VII is a fairly important game to me, as I know it is for many other people. The original Final Fantasy VII was so dense with story and themes, and does them so well, and did them at a time where a game could be that huge and have that many themes in it, whereas today, the graphical boundaries, especially within Square Enix, have been pushed so much, there's no way they could cram all of that into a game. And the latter-day Square Enix more or less boils Final Fantasy VII in periphery media down to a few very simple, straightforward things. Mostly, two pretty men with big swords flailing at each other. The original Final Fantasy VII didn't just dabble, didn't just play around with the themes of corporatism, climate change, income inequality. It's all there in that game, and it is screaming that stuff in the game. Every town you go to reflects a different aspect of a society under the thumb of major undue corporate influence. And I worry that the remake is going to boil it down too. Hey, do you remember how cool it was when Sephiroth walked into that fire that time? Because if you look at periphery media surrounding Final Fantasy VII, like especially when they did that compilation of Final Fantasy VII gimmick many years ago, most of it does boil down to, hey, how cool is Sephiroth, huh? If you just saw spin-off media from Final Fantasy VII, you would think it's only about some giant epic rivalry that Sephiroth and Cloud had, which in the original game itself isn't even really a thing. I know, I feel like due to the limitations imposed by modern-day graphics and the fact that latter-day Square Enix is a latter-day Square Enix, everything that made Final Fantasy VII what it is, the classic that it is, will be applied with very broad strokes. And I worry that that game explores so much that broad strokes just will not do it any justice. They can't really ignore the theme of a giant corporation destroying the planet for money. That is that's baked in to the whole backstory and first act of the game. But Final Fantasy VII explored these ideas in way more depth than it's ever given credit for. And I really would love to see that level of depth back in, but the modern video game industry shies away from the kind of stuff that Final Fantasy VII dug deeply into in the late 90s. I guess ultimately it boils down to me not really trusting modern Square Enix. Latter day, I'll keep saying, latter day Square Enix. I just don't trust them to do it justice. And that's what it really comes down to. But hey ho, it's early days. Given Square Enix's turnaround time, it's very, very, very early days. A lot could happen between now and when the first part of the game is released. They're releasing it in chunks, are they not? I don't know. Again, that plan could have changed. Anything could change between now and 10,000 years from now. I'm not necessarily worried the game will be bad. It will probably be at least decent, if the ground they covered with Final Fantasy XV is anything to go by. But I do worry it will be an unnecessary and a comparatively shallow reimagining. Though I will hope against hope that I'm wrong. I like being wrong about games that I worry about not being good, because that would mean I get a good game. And that's nice. While I'm here, I'll do another trailer. This one wasn't worth having its own video for. This is Predator Hunting Grounds. It was also shown off at the State of Play event, and I'll admit, I was very excited when I saw just the teaser on its own. I was like, oh, a Predator game, I'm all about that. I don't like Predator as much as I love Aliens, but I do like Predator quite a lot. But it turned out it's an asymmetrical multiplayer game, which I don't mind. I like multiplayer games well enough. I like asymmetrical multiplayer, as they call it, quite a bit. I'm very fond of it, but I just want a horror game. A horror game in the jungle being stalked by a predator, that would be amazing. But of course everything's got to be a multiplayer game now. Everything's got to take on the appearance of a service or something similar. Basically a game has to keep you going in perpetuity without any defined end in sight. And it's not to say this will be bad, it sounds very much like Evolve, but with a monster people give a shit about. So that's exciting, sort of, but nowhere near as exciting as it would have been to me if it had been a single-player game, if they'd have focused on telling a solo story, like they would have done, or would have had a better chance of doing last generation. You know, I wasn't all that enthused by that Friday the 13th game, which had a similar thing where everyone's playing as the victims slash escapees slash humans, would just say the humans, and then one person plays the monster, the slasher, the creature. But I will play it, I'll probably enjoy it, but I miss it. I miss seeing a trailer for a game and thinking I'm gonna get an experience out of this with an atmosphere and a story and a beginning, a middle and an end, rather than just, oh, well there's something I can dip into and play for 5 minutes at a time. I realise I've been very down in this video, very cynical indeed, even more so than usual, but I just see a lot of things that I want to be excited about, but there's some caveat that makes it just a little bit less exciting for me. Which is a shame, but anyway, there's Predator. I'm going to go play other things now, because a fucking remaster for Blood came out this week and no one told me. I loved Blood when I was younger, so I'm going to go look at that now. That'll be something I can talk about that's nice. Huh? Wouldn't you like that? Yeah.